Trump just triggered what political insiders are calling the most serious Republican Party fracture since Watergate. A total of 23 Republican senators, including 3 committee chairs and the Senate Minority Whip, have publicly broken with party leadership to demand a full Senate investigation into Trump's mounting legal problems and their impact on the GOP's electoral prospects. And this isn't some backroom grumbling or anonymous sourcing. This is sitting Republican senators going on record stating that Trump's criminal prosecutions represent an existential threat to the party's future that can no longer be ignored or dismissed as political persecution. When senior Republican senators with decades of party loyalty openly challenge the presumptive presidential nominee over his legal troubles, you know something seismic has just fractured the foundation of American conservative politics. Hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss any of the videos I release. So what sparked this unprecedented Senate revolt? According to multiple sources familiar with closed-door Republican caucus meetings, the breaking point came during a February 5th conference where internal polling data was presented showing Trump's 4 criminal prosecutions have created catastrophic damage to Republican candidates in swing state Senate races. The data reportedly shows that 61% of independent voters in 6 key battleground states now view the Republican Party as prioritizing loyalty to Trump over accountability to law, and that Republican Senate candidates are trailing Democratic opponents by margins ranging from 7 to 14 points, specifically because of their association with Trump's legal problems. This isn't just another internal party disagreement or tactical dispute about messaging strategy. Senior Republican senators are publicly stating that Trump's legal situation has become a liability so severe that it threatens to cost the party control of the Senate and potentially damage Republican electoral prospects for an entire generation. And believe me, when Republican senators who face re-election in competitive states start distancing themselves from their own party's presidential nominee 6 months before the general election, you know the political calculus has shifted dramatically. It's honestly hard to believe we're watching Republican senators openly discuss whether their party's presumptive nominee should withdraw from the presidential race because his criminal trials are destroying down-ballot candidates' chances of winning their own elections. Here's the full picture of what's been unfolding. Tensions within the Republican Senate caucus have been building since August 2023, when Trump was first indicted on federal charges related to January 6th. Initially, nearly all Republican senators rallied around Trump, characterizing the prosecutions as politically motivated and pledging unwavering support. But everything changed, according to sources, on January 31st, when the National Republican Senatorial Committee presented internal polling data during a closed-door strategy session. The presentation reportedly showed that Republican candidates in Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ohio are underperforming compared to previous election cycles, and that focus groups consistently cite Trump's legal problems as the primary reason independent voters are unwilling to support Republican Senate candidates. This wasn't about senators disagreeing with Trump's policies or questioning his political appeal to the base. It was about facing hard electoral data showing that Trump's criminal prosecutions are creating down-ballot devastation that could cost Republicans the Senate majority, regardless of how loyal individual candidates remain to Trump personally. Smash that like button if this is making sense so far. So, here's where it really gets serious. When Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina reviewed the NRSC polling data, he immediately recognized that the numbers represented an existential threat to Republican Senate prospects. Tillis, who chairs the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution and faces his own competitive re-election race in 2026, reportedly told colleagues during the January 31st meeting that continuing to defend Trump's legal situation was political suicide for senators in swing states. According to 3 sources who attended the meeting, Tillis stated bluntly that Republican candidates cannot win independent voters while simultaneously arguing that 4 separate criminal prosecutions brought by different jurisdictions are all coordinated political witch hunts. He emphasized that voters in competitive states are capable of distinguishing between political disagreements and actual criminal conduct, and that the party's blanket defense of Trump, regardless of evidence, is destroying Republicans' credibility on law and order issues. And let's be honest for a moment. Open revolts by sitting senators against their party's presidential nominee are extraordinarily rare in American political history. They don't happen over minor policy disagreements or tactical messaging disputes. They happen when senators conclude that their political survival requires public separation from a nominee who has become an electoral liability so severe that association threatens their own re-election prospects. Here's what multiple Senate sources say happened next. On February 3rd, a group of Republican senators held an emergency meeting in Senator Tillis's office to discuss the NRSC polling data and potential responses. The group included Senators Tillis, Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Mitt Romney of Utah, Todd Young of Indiana, and 12 other senators representing states where Trump either lost in 2020 or won by margins smaller than 5 percentage points. Sources told Politico that Senator Collins, who has maintained political independence from Trump throughout his political career, argued forcefully that Republican senators could no longer credibly claim Trump's legal problems are irrelevant to governance or electoral politics. She reportedly stated that voters are watching Republican senators defend conduct that, if proven in court, would represent serious violations of federal law and constitutional principles. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, the group had agreed to draft a joint statement calling for a comprehensive Senate investigation into the political and electoral impact of Trump's legal situation on Republican candidates and the party's long-term viability. The statement was released publicly on February 5th at 9:17 a.m. Eastern Time. The statement declares that the Republican Party faces a crisis of credibility when its presidential nominee confronts 4 separate criminal prosecutions while party leaders continue to dismiss all legal proceedings as politically motivated, regardless of evidence presented in court. Reporters who obtained the full text described the language as remarkably blunt for intra-party communication. The statement acknowledges that many Republican voters remain loyal to Trump, but argues that the party cannot win general elections by appealing exclusively to the base while alienating the independent voters necessary for electoral success in competitive states. Drop a comment right now if you saw this coming. I read every single one. Now things get absolutely wild. When the joint statement was released on February 5th, the immediate reaction from Trump and his closest Senate allies was furious and combative. Within 90 minutes of the statement's publication, Trump posted on Truth Social calling the 23 Republican senators weak rhinos and traitors who are stabbing him in the back while he fights against the radical left witch hunt. He specifically named Senators Tillis, Collins, Murkowski, and Romney, characterizing them as Democrats in disguise who have always opposed his America First agenda. But the response from Senate Republican leadership revealed deep fractures within the party's power structure. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who has maintained a complicated relationship with Trump since January 6th, declined to criticize the senators who signed the statement. According to sources familiar with McConnell's thinking, the Senate leader privately agrees that Trump's legal problems represent a significant electoral liability, but he has avoided public statements that might further inflame intra-party tensions. That's when it became clear this isn't just a disagreement between Trump and a handful of moderate Republican senators. This is a fundamental split within the Republican Senate caucus over whether loyalty to Trump or electoral self-preservation should take priority when the two objectives come into direct conflict. The bombshell moment came on February 6th during a previously scheduled Republican Senate caucus lunch when Senator Tillis stood and addressed his colleagues about the joint statement and the reasoning behind it. According to 4 senators who were present, Tillis presented additional internal polling data showing that Republican candidates' support for Trump's legal defense correlates directly with declining support among independent voters in their states. He reportedly displayed charts showing that in Pennsylvania, Republican Senate candidate David McCormick has seen his favorability rating among independents drop 11 percentage points since he began defending Trump's legal situation in campaign appearances. Similar patterns appeared in polling from Arizona, Nevada, and Wisconsin. Tillis then made an argument that stunned many colleagues. He stated that the Republican Party faces a choice between supporting Trump through his criminal trials and maintaining a viable path to winning the Senate majority in 2024 and holding competitive seats in 2026. He argued that the party cannot do both simultaneously because the evidence being presented in Trump's criminal cases is too damaging for Republican candidates to defend while also appealing to moderate and independent voters. According to senators present, Tillis concluded by saying that he would rather lose Trump's endorsement and face a primary challenge than lose his general election because he spent 2 years defending criminal conduct that voters in North Carolina find indefensible. This move sent shockwaves through the Republican establishment. When a sitting Republican senator publicly declares that defending Trump's legal situation is politically suicidal and that electoral survival requires separation from the party's presidential nominee, it signals one thing. The internal polling data is so catastrophic that senators are willing to risk Trump's wrath and potential primary challenges rather than continue down a path that leads to general election defeat. The claims that this is typical intra-party disagreement collapse when nearly 24 Republican senators, including committee chairs and members of Senate leadership, are willing to put their names on a statement challenging the party's presidential nominee over his legal problems. This isn't the first time Republican senators have broken with their party's presidential nominee over serious scandals or legal troubles. Think back to August 1974, when Republican Senators Barry Goldwater, Hugh Scott, and John Rhodes went to the White House to tell President Nixon that he had lost Republican support in the Senate and could not survive an impeachment trial. That delegation effectively ended Nixon's presidency because it made clear that even his own party would vote to convict. Nixon resigned within days because he understood that partisan loyalty had limits when facing overwhelming evidence of criminal conduct. Then there was the 2016 presidential campaign when the Access Hollywood tape was released, showing Trump making lewd comments about women. Multiple Republican senators, including John McCain, Kelly Ayotte, and Mike Lee, publicly withdrew their endorsements of Trump and called for him to step aside as the nominee. While Trump ultimately remained the nominee and won the election, the episode demonstrated that Republican senators were willing to publicly break with their own party's candidate when his conduct crossed lines they found unacceptable. Subscribe immediately if you haven't yet. This content doesn't exist anywhere else. And let's not forget the aftermath of January 6th, when 7 Republican senators voted to convict Trump in his second impeachment trial, despite enormous political pressure from the Republican base to acquit. Senators Richard Burr, Bill Cassidy, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Mitt Romney, Ben Sasse, and Pat Toomey all concluded that Trump's conduct surrounding the Capitol attack warranted removal from office, even though conviction would have required 17 Republican senators to break ranks. Those 7 senators faced severe backlash, including censure resolutions from state Republican parties, but they maintained that constitutional principles outweighed partisan loyalty. Now, however, it's different. This time, 23 Republican senators are publicly stating that Trump's legal problems represent an electoral threat to the party's Senate majority and future viability. The pattern is clear. When Republican senators conclude that defending a president or nominee will cost them their own elections or violate constitutional principles they've sworn to uphold, partisan loyalty eventually reaches a breaking point. Political calculation and principled disagreement can both override party unity when the stakes become sufficiently high. So what allegedly triggered this specific revolt at this particular moment? According to Republican political strategists who have reviewed the NRSC internal polling, the data shows a dramatic shift in how independent voters view the Republican Party's relationship with Trump's legal problems. Polling conducted in December 2024 showed that 47% of independent voters believe Trump's prosecutions were politically motivated. But polling conducted in late January 2025, after several pretrial hearings where substantial evidence was presented publicly, showed that number had dropped to 31%. The 16-point shift represents a fundamental change in how persuadable voters perceive Trump's legal situation. Here's the kicker. The polling reportedly shows that independent voters are not simply turning against Trump personally. They are turning against Republican candidates who continue to defend Trump's legal situation after evidence has been presented in court proceedings. Focus groups conducted in Pennsylvania and Arizona revealed that voters view Republican Senate candidates' continued defense of Trump as evidence that those candidates prioritize party loyalty over accountability to law. One focus group participant in suburban Phoenix was quoted in the NRSC presentation saying that if a Republican senator cannot acknowledge that trying to overturn an election is wrong, even when someone from their own party does it, then that senator has no principles worth respecting. This wasn't a question of whether voters liked Trump's policies or agreed with his political positions. It was about voters concluding that Republican candidates' unwavering support for Trump, regardless of evidence presented in criminal proceedings, demonstrates a lack of integrity that disqualifies them from holding office. Don't go anywhere. The most explosive part is coming next. And here's what should alarm everyone. This isn't just about one election cycle or one set of Senate races. If the Republican Party becomes permanently associated in voters' minds with defending criminal conduct when committed by Republican officials, the long-term electoral consequences could reshape American politics for a generation. Once voters conclude that a political party prioritizes protecting its own members from legal accountability over upholding rule of law, that reputational damage persists long after individual candidates and elections fade from memory. This puts Republican senators in a nearly impossible position. On one side, they face enormous pressure from Republican primary voters who remain fiercely loyal to Trump and view any criticism of him as betrayal worthy of primary challenges and defeat. That means defending Trump regardless of what evidence emerges in his criminal trials, attacking prosecutors and judges as politically biased, and framing the entire legal situation as a coordinated deep state conspiracy to prevent Trump from returning to the presidency. On the other side, they face electoral reality in general elections where independent voters who decide competitive races are increasingly unwilling to support candidates who defend conduct they view as serious violations of law and constitutional principles. They now have to explain to swing voters why criminal charges brought by different prosecutors in different jurisdictions under different legal theories are all somehow coordinated political persecution rather than legitimate prosecutions of serious alleged crimes. That's a position that becomes harder to maintain as evidence is presented publicly in courtroom proceedings. And here's the tricky part. There's no middle ground that satisfies both constituencies. Either Republican senators defend Trump's legal situation and risk losing independent voters in general elections, or they distance themselves from Trump and risk losing Republican primary voters who view such separation as unforgivable betrayal. The joint statement from 23 senators represents a calculated decision that general election viability matters more than avoiding primary challenges. But that calculation only works if enough senators make the same choice simultaneously to provide political cover for one another. Legal and political analysts are calling this a realignment moment that could fundamentally reshape the Republican Party's coalition and electoral strategy. A political science professor from Princeton who studies party coalitions told CNN that the Republican Senate revolt represents the first significant evidence that GOP elected officials are willing to prioritize electoral competitiveness over loyalty to Trump when forced to choose between the two. While Republican House members and state-level officials have remained almost uniformly supportive of Trump, senators facing statewide elections in competitive states face different electoral mathematics because they cannot win with base voters alone. A former Republican National Committee official added that the NRSC polling data revealing Trump's legal problems are destroying Republican Senate candidates' prospects among independent voters creates an existential crisis for the party. If Republicans cannot win Senate seats in swing states because of association with Trump, then the party faces potential long-term minority status in the Senate, regardless of how well Trump performs with the Republican base in presidential primaries. Do me a favor and slam that like button, because it genuinely helps this video reach more people. Even a conservative political analyst who generally supports Trump admitted that the 23-senator revolt represents a serious problem that cannot be dismissed as typical intra-party disagreement. He emphasized that when nearly a quarter of Republican senators publicly question whether defending Trump's legal situation is compatible with winning general elections, the party faces a fundamental strategic dilemma with no easy resolution. So let's break down what this could mean. First, The immediate political impact is that Republican Senate candidates in competitive states now have explicit permission from nearly 24 sitting senators to distance themselves from Trump's legal problems without being characterized as disloyal to the party. Before the joint statement, individual candidates who questioned Trump's legal defense risked being isolated and facing coordinated attacks from Trump and his allies. Now, respected senators, including committee chairs, have created a permission structure that allows candidates to prioritize their own electoral prospects over unwavering defense of Trump. This could trigger a cascade effect where more Republican candidates begin acknowledging that Trump's legal problems are serious rather than dismissing all prosecutions as political witch hunts. Second, it creates enormous pressure on Senate Republican leadership to choose between maintaining unity with Trump or protecting the party's Senate majority prospects. Mitch McConnell has attempted to avoid taking clear positions on Trump's legal situation, but the 23-senator statement makes continued neutrality increasingly difficult. If McConnell supports the senators who signed the statement, he risks open warfare with Trump and his most loyal Senate allies. If McConnell criticizes those senators, he risks appearing indifferent to polling data showing that defending Trump is costing Republicans competitive Senate races. Either choice fractures the Republican caucus further and makes governing and electoral coordination more difficult. Finally, looking ahead, the broader political implications are profound because this establishes a precedent that Republican senators in competitive states will prioritize their own electoral survival over loyalty to Trump when internal data shows the two objectives are incompatible. Every future Trump controversy or legal development will be evaluated by Republican senators through the lens of how it affects their individual re-election prospects rather than whether it helps or hurts Trump personally. This fundamentally changes the dynamics of Republican Party politics from top-down loyalty to the presidential nominee toward a more decentralized model where individual senators make independent calculations about when association with Trump helps versus hurts their electoral prospects. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'm genuinely curious to see your perspective. But beyond the immediate political fallout, this is really about fundamental questions of how political parties balance loyalty to leaders against electoral viability and governing principles. Political parties exist to win elections and implement policy agendas, not simply to defend individual leaders regardless of circumstances or electoral consequences. If defending a party leader becomes incompatible with winning the elections necessary to hold power, party members face a choice between loyalty and political survival. The 23 Republican senators who signed the joint statement have concluded that their political survival and the party's Senate majority prospects require public acknowledgement that Trump's legal problems represent a serious liability rather than continuing to dismiss all prosecutions as political persecution. This scenario is causing sheer panic within Trump's campaign operation and among his closest political allies. Reports indicate that senior Trump advisors held emergency conference calls on February 5th, immediately after the joint statement was released, to develop response strategies. Some advisors argued for attacking the 23 senators viciously to deter other Republicans from joining the revolt. Others insisted that such attacks would backfire by reinforcing the narrative that Trump prioritizes personal loyalty over the party's electoral interests. The campaign is fracturing in real time between advisors who believe doubling down on attacks against disloyal Republicans will restore party discipline and those who recognize that alienating nearly a quarter of Republican senators creates insurmountable problems for governing if Trump wins the presidency. Meanwhile, Trump's core supporters are absolutely furious at the Republican senators who signed the statement. Social media platforms exploded with calls to primary every senator who broke ranks and to support challengers who pledge absolute loyalty to Trump regardless of his legal situation. They're characterizing the 23 senators as traitors and establishment sellouts who are helping Democrats by undermining Trump during his criminal prosecutions. To the base, this represents the ultimate betrayal and proof that even Republican senators cannot be trusted to defend Trump against his enemies. Things escalated further when Trump himself responded with posts on Truth Social throughout February 5th and 6th. He called the 23 senators weak and stupid people who are helping the radical left destroy America. He claimed the joint statement proves that the Republican establishment has always opposed his America First movement and wants him to fail so they can return the party to the old guard politicians who lost elections while enriching themselves. He specifically targeted Senator Tillis, calling him a rhino loser who is terrified of losing his seat and is willing to stab Trump in the back to save himself. Trump vowed that every senator who signed the statement would face primary challengers with his full endorsement and financial support, and that Republican voters would remember who stood with Trump during his persecution and who betrayed him. Stay with me. What comes next will completely change how you view the situation. Here's what makes it even more extraordinary. Trump's response to the Senate revolt is actually accelerating the party fracture rather than healing it. By threatening primary challenges against 23 sitting Republican senators, Trump is forcing Senate Republicans to choose between supporting colleagues who face credible electoral challenges in general elections versus supporting primary challengers whose main qualification is loyalty to Trump. That choice divides the caucus further because senators understand that losing general elections because of association with Trump damages the entire Republican Senate conference, while winning primaries with Trump-endorsed challengers who then lose general elections leaves the party worse off than before. Legal and political experts immediately flagged the strategic miscalculation. Threatening senators who are concerned about general election viability with primary challenges does not address their fundamental problem. It reinforces it by confirming that Trump prioritizes personal loyalty over the party's electoral success. Senators worried about losing independent voters will not be reassured by threats of primary challenges. They will be more convinced that separation from Trump is necessary for political survival. This goes far beyond a single joint statement or one moment of inter-party tension. It's about whether the Republican Party can maintain electoral competitiveness in swing states while simultaneously defending a presidential nominee facing 4 separate criminal prosecutions. If the answer is no, then Republican senators in those states must choose between their own re-election and loyalty to Trump. The joint statement from 23 senators represents the first significant evidence that a substantial portion of the Republican Senate caucus has concluded that electoral survival requires public distance from Trump's legal problems, regardless of the personal and political consequences. It's not just about one group of senators or one election cycle. It's about whether the Republican Party's electoral coalition can sustain the tension between a base that demands absolute loyalty to Trump and swing voters who increasingly view such loyalty as evidence of failed principles. If this blows your mind, hit that like button right now. Here's the situation we're facing. 23 Republican senators have publicly stated that Trump's criminal prosecutions represent an electoral liability so severe that the party must acknowledge the problem rather than continuing to dismiss all legal proceedings as political persecution. Internal polling shows that Republican Senate candidates in swing states are losing independent voters specifically because of their association with Trump's legal defense. Trump has responded by threatening primary challenges against every senator who signed the statement, which further divides the Republican caucus and reinforces senators' concerns that Trump prioritizes personal loyalty over the party's electoral interests.